these people are, they are expressing the interests of capital in a more lethal manner. Keir Starmer, let's go to Keir Starmer. I don't think he even deserves us mentioning his name. But Tony Blair was the worst Tory Prime Minister Britain ever had.
Was he? Did he do more damage to this country than Margaret Thatcher?
Well, he completed her damage. He was essential in completing the damage that Margaret Thatcher made. Because you see, Thatcher privatized externally, wholesale privatization. She took the housing stock from council houses. 30% of houses were, when I moved to England in 1978, I remember 30% were council houses. So she essentially enriched those lucky enough to be allowed to buy those houses. I'm sure they loved it, and they had every reason to, but the result was the complete catastrophe that now young people, and not so young people, experience in the housing market is the result of that. She took British Gas. She had Price Coopers value it, and she sold it at half the evaluation, half of its market value. You are too young to remember. The ads were amazing by Saatchi and Saatchi. Tell Sid, in other words, tell Sid that to become a spiv, that if you buy £1,000 worth of British Gas shares, then you can sell them tomorrow morning for 2,000. Why? Because the company was valued at half its actual market value. Okay, and people felt fantastic because suddenly, they could. I remember people were coming to me and say, "Look, will you use your quota to buy British Gas shares?" I remember I used to live in Norwich back then, and I said no because I wasn't going to participate in this racket. And they said, "Oh well, can you allow us to buy your share? And I will give you £500. We'll give you half the profits."
Secondary markets.
Yes, indeed, and it was happening all the time. And so that's how the spivs became Thatcherites. And that's how the Sierra man became shifted from the Labour Party to the Tory Party. It was a great success story, but that effectively depleted massive amounts of publicly owned capital, and essentially threw it into the mill of the financialization that the City of London was creating, and that was all wasted, including North Sea oil. All the proceeds were used in order effectively to fight a class war against the working class, with the miners' strike, with all that. And then Blair comes on. When Blair became Prime Minister, effectively everything had been solved already. So he does something more insidious than Thatcher. He takes the National Health Service, for instance, or the public school system, and starts, without formally privatizing them, the NHS remained public, but he starts an incipient internal privatization of all its functions, of its services, the subcontracting, the private-public initiatives. That was all doing what, essentially? Increasing the cost of running the NHS massively, adding new layers of managers on behalf of private companies that had taken over the NHS, except the shell of the NHS, which remained public. He did the same thing with schools, the quasi-private academies, and so on. I'm sure that some of those schools are better as a result, but they exclude the working class. If you're working class, you can't send your kids there. In the same way that the council houses were privatized, some working class people benefit, but in the end, there are no houses for the working class, council houses for the working class. And this was the Labour Party that did it. And now we have a new Labour government, a new Blairite Labour government that is taking this further down the same road of turning what is left of public institutions in this country into empty shells where there is a cesspool of financialization within that increases the costs at taxpayers' expenses and reduces quality, reduces quantity, and eliminates the sense that the British people have that they're actually in control, or their state even is in control of the social economy of this country. So talking about Labour or PASOK in my country as left, centre-left, no. They are the worst part of the machinery of financialization and of turning our societies into neoliberal nightmares.
the thing about council houses is really interesting because it's such a big class signifier in this country, right? Oh, I mean, Sadiq Khan, who I don't dislike the guy. I wouldn't vote Labour. I don't dislike him. He's not the worst person in Labour by a long way. He would say, I grew up in a council house, or I lived in a council house. And I'm thinking, mate, I lived in London 15 years. I lived in a council house. It's just the difference is I paid £1,000 a month for it because it had been privatised in the 1980s. People don't live in council houses generally anymore because guess what? They don't exist. So that really, really bothers me. But I have a question. You mentioned Blair. You were going to talk about Starmy, so you weren't, engage in the indignity of mentioning. Yeah, but this is really interesting for me because I was going to ask you, do you think they know what they're doing? So, for instance, recently, Keir Starmer gave a speech and he said that we're getting all this investment from the US and Blackstone, this asset manager, is quote unquote investing, I can't remember, tens of billions of pounds, investing. Now, people who know what asset managers do know they're not investing. What they're doing is they're buying assets, clues in the name. They try and buy them cheap. They underinvest. They underpay. They squeeze as much revenue as they can, and then they try and sell them at a marked up price. So that's not investment. That's actually the complete opposite of investment. But do you think
They
Keir
suck
Starmer,
them dry.
does Keir Starmer know that? Do you think?
Well, Tony Blair certainly did because he was a very smart man. He still is a very smart man. He's as evil as they come, but he's smart. I don't think there's much happening inside Keir Starmer's head. I have very serious doubts about his intelligence.
He was the director of public prosecutions.
Yeah, he was a terrible director of public prosecutions. He has left a terrible legacy. I have heard stories from within that he was one of the worst people to have run the CPS. And if you look at his record too, politically, as the director of the Crown Prosecution Service, you'll find that even on the basis of human rights and discrimination, it's not a record that he should be proud of. But in any case, look, I have no doubt he's a good lawyer. But that's a bit like an AI bot that knows to do one job well. So, you give him a brief, you say, this is what I want you to argue, and he's pretty good at putting together a case and arguing that brief. But as Prime Minister, he has to create a brief. And I don't think he has a clue of how to do that. It's clear. I mean, he's stumbling and falling on his face. And
you don't think he's a creative thinker?
I don't think he's a great thinker. His greatest asset was that he operated like a chameleon during the time of my friend Jeremy Corbyn in the Labour Party. And he managed to position himself as somebody that was loyal, that had the capacity to argue like a lawyer, and that he could bridge the two factions of the Labour Party. He could with the face of somebody resembling Tony Blair, he could pursue a radical manifesto as he had promised to do in 2019, to maintain the radical manifesto of Jeremy Corbyn in 2019. But within a year, he had ditched the 2019 manifesto. He had embraced, along with Rachel Reeves, the George Osborne mentality about fiscal prudence. And, of course, got rid out of, he expelled from the Labour Party. I mean, to think that he expelled Ken Loach for anti-Semitism. I mean, you only need to state that to realize that this man has never seen a moral void in which he didn't jump headlong.
I've got a really good friend of mine. He's half Italian, half Ecuadorian. His dad was a postman, and his mum used to work in. My mum used to have a sandwich shop. His mum used to work in the video shop over the road. Really working class background, and he's done really well. He's now a quantity surveyor. He lives in Qatar. He makes a ton of money. Just makes tons of money. And he has this knack for like really good folksy wisdom. And he said this thing to me, which is just, it's how I now view Keir Starmer. He said, people like that can end up earning hundreds of thousands of pounds a year if they just do what they're told, they side with the powerful, and they turn to everything 15 minutes early. And that is 3/4 of the powerful bureaucrats you're ever going to meet in your life.
Exactly. I mean,
it's crazy to think that.
That's a smarter way of putting what I said earlier, that he's good at, in pursuing a brief that is handed to him. But he cannot come up with one of his own. Look, compare and contrast him and Tony Blair. Tony Blair was a strategist. He was very good at creating his own objectives and strategizing in order to get them done, to achieve them. I disagreed with his objectives, and I disagree with his means, especially his violation of international law and the resulting, hundreds of thousands of deaths in Iraq. But he knew how to get things done. I don't think Keir Starmer can do that. You can see that he's flip-flopping. He doesn't even have his own agenda. And the worst aspect of it is that he's trying to appeal to people and to interests that will never find him appealing. And he keeps rubbishing the people that should be the natural constituency of the Labour Party.
How long do you think he'll be Prime Minister for? I know these are foolish questions, Yanis, but
I have no idea, Aaron. It just reminded me of Keynes's expression that, the market can stay rational for longer than I can stay solvent or alive. So, this political system with the great majority he has, it depends on the Parliamentary Labour Party. If they see that their survival chances are not improving as a result of Keir Starmer's performance, they'll probably get rid of him and replace him in the same way that the Tories kept changing one prime minister after the other.
I mean, there was one poll that put them on 16%, right? And I think the Greens were on 12%.
I don't understand who amongst those 16% would have confidence in such a man. I find it an extraordinarily high percentage.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's very high, 16%.
Well, maybe in a proportional system.
16% of the population who still trust Keir Starmer, amazes me.